Today is Saturday, June the 22nd, 1 week later, and I'm wearing the same clothes. And yes, they have been through the laundry since last week. My laundry at home, my washing machine. So I'm not smelling, everything's cool. Got a few things to talk about today. Don't know how many of them we'll cover. I've got a script. I'm ready. Cheers. First of all, the rainy season has arrived. It's rained every day this week. Not all the time, but very heavy, once or twice a day. And it tends to catch you out, especially me, as I go out exercising twice a day, so it's a bit of a trick fitting it all in. And there is a good chance I will get absolutely soaked. And it looks pretty, this morning was gorgeous. I went up for a walk this morning, it was beautiful, but it looks pretty evil out there right now, I must tell. And let's hope I don't get caught in the rain on the way back to the bus. But anyway, the rainy season has arrived. I want to talk to you about karma. I'm a big believer in karma, and as time has gone on and I've got older, I believe in it more and more. All my life I never got away with anything. If I did something wrong, I'd always get caught out. But now if I do something bad, and I hope I never do anything really bad, but if I do, something in my life always goes wrong. But my mind is now, in my current circumstance, my mind is now going back to my mother and the way that I treated her. Basically, I abandoned her in the UK to go and work in first of all, around other places in the world, secondly, the USA. My excuse being I couldn't possibly, be there to look after her as any decent son would, because I had to earn the money to support the house she was living in and my own life. Part of that is true, of course, but she ended up in a home because she couldn't look after herself anymore. And she was very well treated. I went and visited her whenever I was back in the UK. But basically, I abandoned her. And now here I am in the waning days of my life, and I've been abandoned too by my girlfriend, who's away working because she's got to work to pay off whatever bloody debt she's incurred. Truth behind all of that, we will hopefully find out when she returns, if I'm still here. It's ironic that my visa runs out before she gets back, and they're toughening up all the requirements for visas and whatever, so I don't even know if I'm going to be able to renew my visa. There's so much shit for me to worry about now. I hardly sleep at all. I'm in a really bad mental place right now. But that is karma. What I did to my mother has now been done to me. My mind wandered back the other day to maybe 50 years ago, when I was a young radio officer on board a ship. One of my best friends was Willie, the electrician. And he was this huge giant of a guy from the Gorbals in Glasgow. And he spoke with a thick Glaswegian accent that I won't even try to imitate. But I was a very young sort of 19-year-old, and he was in his mid to late 20s, I would think. But he was a big guy. But ironically, we got along very well, and we used to go ashore together and whatever. And whenever I went ashore with Willie, I always knew that I'd get back in one piece because he'd look after me. And then came the day when it all went wrong, when Willie got hopelessly drunk and I had to get him back to the ship. And I think it was on the old St. Mariel, so it was probably somewhere in the Caribbean, maybe even in Kingston, Jamaica, which is an extremely dangerous place at night. And I remember the place we were in was dangerous at night, but somehow or other I managed to get Willie back to the ship. He was all over the place, he couldn't think straight or whatever, But I did it. I repaid him for all of the protection money I never paid him. I repaid him. I don't know if you're still around, still alive, Willie. I doubt it, because you were much older than me. But anyway, it was nice to know you. I want to talk about battleships. Not all battleships, just some. And somehow or other, as usual, I managed to work it into being about me. And let's start off with the me bit. As you already know, I exercise furiously. I mean, in a week's time, I'm going to be 75 years old. And knock on wood, it's a wooden bar, knock on wood, I'm in pretty good shape for my age. And inside, I feel like a reasonably young man with, young man's sexual desires and young man's desires for fast cars and God knows what else. But outside, I mean, if you look at me, or I look at myself in the mirror, I'm an old man. And that's the conundrum, and that's what made me think about battleships for some reason or other. I'm going to have to explain. The main era of the dreadnought battleship was World War I. And this thinking about myself made me think about the Revenge class of battleship that was built between 1909 and 1911. Let's see if I can name them. I mean, I know a lot about battleships. If there was a pub quiz night and a question came up about battleships, I'd be your boy, Let's see if I can name them. There was the Revenge, the Resolution, the Royal Oak, the Ramillies, and the Royal Sovereign. Let's just check my list that I wrote down earlier to see if I'm right. Exactly right. And interesting that one member of the class was the Ramillies, because my grandfather served on the Ramillies at one point, and my mother told me that when she was a little girl, when the Ramillies was the kind of guardian ship of Sheerness dockyard, there was an open day, and she went aboard and was given a tour of the battleship, which she never forgot. And I don't forget her telling me about it either. Now, as I said, the R-class battleships, is it the Resolution? The Resolution class were built between 1909 and 1911, I think it was. Let me just... No, they were built between 1913 and 1917. Sorry, I couldn't remember my own script. But they were built as smaller, slower, but better armoured versions of the preceding Queen Elizabeth class. And I'll talk about that separately. I'll probably say this again towards the end of this segment, but for me and many people, the Queen Elizabeth class was the finest class of battleship that Great Britain ever produced. It was, they were superb ships. And from memory, Queen Elizabeth, the Warspite, the Barham, the Malaya. Editor's note, the first of many. I'm pretty proud of the way I can come in with a pre-prepared script and just do it, but I inevitably forget stuff. I could have sworn there were 5 ships in that class, and I've just checked, and there were the Queen Elizabeth, the Warspite, the Barham, the Malaya. Already mentioned those, but there was also HMS Valiant, and no one ever seems to mention that at all. So I checked up, and she lived out her full term. She wasn't sunk prematurely. She was scrapped in 1948, same as the rest of them. Anyway, we're talking about the Revenge class right now. The R's right now. I may have called them the Resolution class before, but it varies. When they were first built, they were adequate ships, but they were slower versions of the Queen Elizabeth, and they could only do 21 knots flat out when they were brand new. But one thing they did have going for them was good armour protection and this superb 15-inch Mark I gun. Now there's more to a naval gun than just the barrel thing that you see sticking out of the top of the ship. There's what's in the gun house, the training and elevation machinery, the barbette that it's mounted on that stretches all the way down to the bottom of the ship, you know, the shell handling rooms, the explosive handling rooms, the shell hoist, the design of all of that stuff, the training and elevation machinery, all of that makes a difference in whether a gun is successful or not. And also, we mustn't overlook the ammunition as well, you know, its ballistic shape, how it flies through the air, the charge that the gun barrels are able to withstand, therefore what range it's got and whatever. And I read that they did a test after the conclusion of World War II. I'm not sure who they were, but there was a committee set up to test all of the different battleship guns that were around at the time. And it was decided that as an overall package, the British 15-inch gun, by that time it was the Mark II variant, which had a slightly better ballistic shape to the shell for a start, and greater elevation to give it more range. But they concluded that overall it was around about the best package of the lot, and that included the 16-inch guns on the Iowa class, the USA's Iowa class. So it was no mean weapon, believe me. And that gun on HMS Warspite in the Second World War, I said I wasn't going to talk about the Queen Elizabeths, but that gun managed to score the longest ever hit from a moving battleship to another moving battleship in the Mediterranean on the Italian battleship Giulio Cesare at 24,000 yards. That equates to 24 kilometers. So, no mean gun. Anyway, the heart of this story is that after the end of World War One, we had this 20 or so years of uneasy peace, and a lot of these ships had a hard life in World War One, and they were used heavily during the interwar period for policing operations and showing the flag and God knows what else. So even in the 1930s, a lot of them were showing their age, and so the Admiralty had to make some kind of a decision. Do we scrap them because better battleships are being built around the world now, or do we modernize them? Now, they ended up deciding that the Queen Elizabeths, because they were so good, and they was at 25 knots, you could almost say they were the fast battleships of their day. Nowadays, a fast battleship they don't exist anymore really, but they're considered to be able to exceed 30 knots. But the Queen Elizabeths were considered worthwhile upgrading and rebuilding, whereas the R class, the Revenge class, looking at my script, the Revenge class weren't considered worth it. They were basically too slow. I mean, when they were new, they could only do 21 knots. By this time, they probably couldn't even make 20 knots. So when World War II came around, all they were useful for, as far as the Admiralty could see, was shore bombardment where necessary, and escorting convoys. And this is where the link to me and my present situation / condition comes in, because I remember Winston Churchill, I think it was, who wrote about them, saying they were too slow to run away and too weak to fight. And I thought, that describes me perfectly. But it turns out that they were very useful ships indeed, because if you look at the statistics, no convoy that ever had one of these aging battleships as part of the escort group were ever attacked by a German surface raider. And there were some pretty nasty German ships around at the time, including the Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, which were nominally battleships, but if they knew that there was one of these old World War One R-class battleships as part of the escort, they left them alone, because they were incredibly fast. They were 30-knot ships, so they could disengage at will. But they only had 11-inch guns, and so they could not penetrate the armour of a Revenge-class battleship, whereas the battleship's 15-inch Mark I guns could blow them out of the water. So, and I mean, this is only my opinion, but I believe even had monsters like the Bismarck and the Tirpitz got loose to do their intended job, even they would have shied away, because again, they were 30-knot ships. They could have blown one of these R-class out of the water or disengaged at will, but standard naval procedure would have been that the escorting battleship would have scattered the convoy and headed directly for the Bismarck or the Tirpitz and engaged, whereupon they would almost certainly have been sunk. But the Germans were very mindful of the fact that they didn't have bases all over the world like the Royal Navy, and it would only have taken a lucky hit from one of those 15-inch shells on, you know, a fire control director, a rangefinder, or the bridge or something to seriously impair the fighting ability of that particular ship and force it to return to Germany through you know, a hail of air cover and God knows what else. They wouldn't have taken the risk. Even the Bismarck wouldn't have taken the risk if there'd have been one of these old Revenge class battleships as part of the escort. So they were useful. I'd still like to think that I'm useful too, even though I'm too slow to run away and too weak to fight. Well, the video is sort of up to 21 and a bit minutes now, so that was all that I can reasonably cram in. There were some odds and ends at the end, but nothing completed, you know. So I didn't get to discuss the Western series Lonesome Dove or Return to Lonesome Dove, which I intend to, but that'll have to wait for another day, another video. So I'll just bid you farewell for now. Cheerio.